Now, from Atlanta News First, the issues that matter to you. This is On the Record.
Hello, and thanks for watching On the Record here on ANF Plus. I'm Rick Folbaum, along with my co-host Doug Reardon, and we're going to walk through these very busy days in the Georgia State Capitol. And Doug, you've been busier than usual. There's so much going on that we want to talk about. Of course, we are coming up on what's known as Crossover Day, which we'll explain in just a minute. But we're also coming up on a deadline for candidates who are trying to qualify to run in the upcoming primaries ahead of this November's midterm elections. And boy, are there so many different races and so many different candidates who are trying to get on this list to take part in these primaries. So a flurry of activity. What have you been hearing, and any surprises as far as the qualifying days is concerned?
Yeah, not so far, I think, as far as qualifying. I will say if there was anything that was surprising, it was how quickly people got it done. You know, this is an entire week where, for those who don't know, you have to qualify to run for elections. It's not a very difficult process. For some, it can be an expensive process. There are some fees associated with it. You have to not necessarily buy your way into the race, but there are fees associated with running. So what you do is you show up at the Capitol. They have a room for Republican qualifying. They have a room for Democrats qualifying. And you go to your respective room and you essentially sit down with members of the state who kind of go over your background, make sure that you are, in fact, eligible to run for office, don't have any outstanding criminal convictions or anything like that. They kind of ask you a couple of questions about your campaign. You write your check, and then you get a notarized qualification form to say, I'm an official candidate. It really is. I know that election season starts years and years sometimes before elections, and we've seen that with this midterm, but this makes it official. So after that deadline on Friday, things will be completely set. The field will be completely cemented, and so it is a very important day. They have a week to do it, these candidates, but when we were there on Monday and Tuesday, we saw just about every major candidate from the gubernatorial field all the way to the Senate race, the House races, and even state and local races as well. We saw people trickling in. There was a line so far that one state lawmaker said, I come every year on Monday to qualify just to get it over with, and I hopped out of line and said, I'll just do it on Tuesday because it was such a long way to get this done. And so to me, that shows a lot of candidate enthusiasm. People are excited to throw their names into the hat this year, throw their hats into the rink this year. You know, they're trying to get it done as soon as possible. We've already seen, for example, Jason Estevez, who is a candidate for governor on the Democratic side. He qualified on Monday, and by today, by the remainder of the week, he had a huge ad buy. So we're already seeing the effects of what officially qualifying as a candidate can do for some of the people running.
Okay, so you mentioned Jason Estevez, and he, of course, is a Democrat who will be running for the Democratic nomination in the upcoming primaries. Let's talk about some of these big races. Of course, you know, anytime there's an open seat, you're going to have a slew of candidates. So, of course, Governor Kemp is not able to run for a third term because of term limits. And so we have a group of Republicans and a group of Democrats, including Estevez, all of whom are vying for the chance to run in the general election in November. That's one of the contests we're looking at. What about some of the other races? We have a Senate seat where we have Jon Ossoff, who is an incumbent Democrat who will be trying to defend his seat for the first time and win a second term. Is he facing any serious challengers on the Democratic side?
Not on the Democratic side. No one's serious to challenge him from within the party. He is the de facto heir to his own seat. People on the Democratic side, by and large, are very happy with Ossoff and what he's been able to do up at the Senate with just his single term. If you can believe it, this is only the first time Ossoff is seeking re-election. I would be more worried about the Republican side of things. You know, Mike Collins, we're continuing to see polls that Collins is the front runner on the GOP side of things. You know, he's collecting as much as 32% of the vote. And what's interesting about these polls is Representative Buddy Carter, who qualified on Monday, Derek Dooley, who qualified on Tuesday. They are collecting each about 16%. It's that undecided voter base on the GOP side that's sitting at about 40% that is going to be the end-all, be-all in this race. Depending on how that 40% of people goes on the GOP side, it could be anyone's game. However, we have seen Mike Collins certainly take the lead in recent polling and in reliable polling data. 30% is a lot when you're only talking about 3 candidates. And so I think Jon Ossoff is completely safe from challenges within his own party. And we will, of course, know by the time qualifying is up if anyone even decides to run against him. But certainly I would be focusing, if I were Ossoff, already on the primary against whoever that on the general against whoever that GOP candidate ends up being. And by the way, Donald Trump has not made an endorsement in that Senate race yet.
Not yet. Some of the other statewide races, of course, that we're going to be following is the race for lieutenant governor, the race for attorney general, the race for secretary of state. There are a couple of public service commission seats that are up for grabs this year, and that's a contest that we might in the past not have paid too much attention to, but not anymore after Democrats surprisingly won a couple of seats in a special election recently. So we'll see. There are 2 seats that are up for grabs in the PSC race. So those are some of the races. And then, of course, we have all of the congressional races because, of course, if you're a member of Congress, you are up for re-election every 2 years.
Right.
It seems like they're always running. So we've got a lot of incumbents who are running, a couple of whom are going to be challenged in these primaries, including a longtime Democrat who is being challenged by members of his own party. We're talking about David Scott, who has served for a long time, but who a lot of Democrats feel may be ready for him to step aside and pass the baton on to the next generation. Is he going to be able to hang on to that, win the primary and hang on and then run in the general election, do you think?
It's going to be very difficult, I think. He is, again, incumbents in Georgia tend to do really, really well. We have a lot of members of our congressional delegation that have served for years, some of them decades. But David Scott is certainly among the more vulnerable candidates here. And I just want to give an anecdote to show that I think even his campaign may believe that to be the case as well. When he qualified on Monday, he was wheeled in a wheelchair, having health issues. The AJC tried to ask him about this, and he was taking a phone call at the time that the AJC later reported was not a real phone call and was just an attempt to evade questions about this. And so, I think that shows a sign of vulnerability. Certainly, it's a strange thing when we're talking about perhaps a blue wave during the midterms at, everything like from what you mentioned, the PSC races, all the way up to Congress, that a Democratic candidate would be vulnerable from challenges within his own party. So it is a bit of an anomaly here in this election cycle. But certainly David Scott has one thing that a lot of these other candidates running against him don't have, and that's name recognition. And in a district like his, that can go a long way. So we will have to wait and see. And when the qualifying dust settles, we'll know exactly who will be challenging him.
Well, it's not unheard of course, for an incumbent to face a challenger from within his or her own party. We saw that just this week in Texas, where Senator John Cornyn is going to face off in a primary, in a runoff election, rather, to determine whether he gets to run for another term in the U.S. Senate. Another Republican in that state challenging him. So it does happen from time to time, and it seems like it could happen there in the case of Congressman Scott. Any other qualifiers who have qualified, people who have made it onto this qualifying list that we didn't expect to be there?
No, not necessarily, but I will tell you there is one race that you and I know all too well, and I will be interested to see, again, when the dust settles, who ends up actually qualifying, and that's
Georgia
the 14th district. Yeah. We had...
this is Marjorie Taylor Greene's former seat.
Exactly, and we called it a jungle primary because at one point there were, 20 GOP candidates in this race. We talked to many of them on the record. But, this is the make or break. This is like the real line in the sand for these candidates. And so once we finally get a clearer picture of this when the period ends, we'll know exactly how many people will be on the ballots come that special election, which, by the way, I checked my calendar, is only about 2 weeks away. Yeah. So we are really getting there. And so it is make or break time for these special election candidates. Obviously, they had their qualifying period beforehand. But, we do also have these midterms coming up. Keep in mind, they have this special election to run for Marjorie Taylor Greene's seat just to fill the remainder of her term, but then they'll have to run again in the midterms. And so that is a bit of a wacky scenario for some of these candidates that are running. But I really want to keep a close eye on that, see what ends up happening. Of course, it's a tough situation because, presumably whoever wins this special election will go on to be the favorite in that other election to fill her seat full time. And so we're keeping an eye on it. Certainly, I would say no surprises outside of the fact that people did it so early this year. It just shows a lot of enthusiasm to just jump into these races and get it going.
A couple of things. We mentioned, of course, we have to look at the national picture here when it comes to the balance of power in Washington. Democrats are hoping to win enough seats in the House to retake control of the majority of the House of Representatives. That would put them in position to really put up roadblocks for the final 2 years of President Trump's term and keep him perhaps from achieving a lot of the policy agendas and goals that he's set for himself. There's also an outside chance that perhaps the Democrats could retake control of the U.S. Senate. A lot would have to go their way in order for that to happen. But again, these majorities in Washington, Doug, are so slim, that really a couple of races here and there, and maybe even here in Georgia could be the determining factor as far as who controls the U.S. Congress.
Absolutely. I mean, we have 4 open seats in our Georgia delegation. That was because Barry Loudermilk retired, I should say. Marjorie Taylor Greene resigned her seat. And then we have Buddy Carter and Mike Collins running for Senate. And so right off the bat, we had 4 open seats that were going to be filled by somebody new no matter what happened. So we are in a unique position there, I think, to see a huge swing happen. And I think a lot of states are kind of in that position as well. We're talking about razor-thin margins. It's why Trump has come down on his Republican congressional members so very much this year, because he has really not had the room for any defections on some of these things. We saw Democrats flex their power, certainly with the ACA subsidies and the government shutdown a couple of months ago. But this could really be dangerous for Donald Trump because he cannot do everything with an executive order, even though he has really pushed the limits of his executive power by issuing orders. He can't do it with everything. And if he loses these majorities in the House and the Senate, it's going to be tough. I mean, you can look back to the Obama days and during his second midterms where there was a huge red wave. He was not able to get a whole lot done in those last 2 years. And it just goes to show that, thankfully, in this system, we have 3 branches of government that are equal. But it just goes to show that, the executive really does need Congress to get a lot of this done. And so I think Trump should be sweating a little bit and probably is looking at Georgia. And it's why we saw him make a trip down to Rome a couple of weeks ago to really stump for these candidates and his backed candidate in that 14th district race. It's because he knows every seat really matters this election cycle.
Speaking of 14th, the Georgia 14th district, it's a special shout out to the voters of Georgia 14 who are really going to be asked to exercise their civic duties over the next several months because they've got that special election coming up, most likely looking at a runoff after that special election because it doesn't seem like any one candidate is going to be able to break that 50% threshold. So we're looking at a runoff, and then of course we have the primaries and the general election. So Georgia 14, they'll all be able to teach a lesson in civics by the time this election cycle is over.
You're going to burn a lot of gas money on getting to the polls.
Going back and forth to the polling stations. All right, let's switch gears now, Doug, and talk a little bit about crossover day.
Yeah.
And just to explain to folks who might not follow Georgia politics very closely, it's a very interesting system here in Georgia. The legislative session each year is very short, 40 days, that's it. And at around the halfway mark, not exactly halfway, but around halfway, there's what's known as crossover day. And crossover day is the day when a piece of legislation, a bill, must get voted from one chamber where the bill originated to the other chamber in order to survive and possibly go on to become law. If it doesn't make that crossover, then the bill is effectively dead for this year. And would then need to be reintroduced in the next legislative session. And so we've seen this time and again. And of course, everybody is watching to everybody has their favorite bill that they're looking out for, their special interest that they care most about. There are about 200 or so bills, is that what I heard Abby Kasouras say in the editorial meeting a couple of minutes ago, that are potentially, sort of bills that could potentially get pass through to the other side and make it over crossover day. But let's talk a little bit about, first of all, that process, what it's going to look like. The deadline is Friday night at midnight. What all goes down between now and then?
Oh, it's a lot. It's a lot. It's nothing close to the end of the session, our last day, but it is a very, very exciting time. There's a lot of chaos going on in that building on crossover day. And yeah, you heard Abby right. They're just on the rules calendar, which is kind of that first step for a bill to get into a committee and then get onto the floor for a vote. There are 200 bills being heard as of Thursday. So that's a lot. I mean, they'll get through maybe a dozen on a good day during a regular day of session, but this is the last chance that a lot of these lawmakers will have to get their bills on the calendar for a vote, probably tomorrow, on Friday, that deadline day. So lots of chaos. Everyone's kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. A couple of caveats about crossover day.
Yes.
The first one is it is not necessarily the end-all be-all for some of these bills. And you know this as well as I do. We have a term here in the political world in Georgia called a zombie bill, and it is exactly what it sounds like. Essentially, if a bill does not pass either the House or the Senate, then what can happen is lawmakers can go back, gut a bill, or add some of the language from their bill that failed onto a different bill that has already passed, and then try and send it through to get a vote. Of course, that would mean it would be amended, so it would have to pass whatever house it crossed over to, as well as the house it originated from again. But I just want to warn everybody, this is not the absolute deadline for these bills. We saw a very famous example a couple of years back where Lyon, Georgia, was trying to make their soapbox derby the official soapbox derby of Georgia. Innocent enough, right?
Yeah.
And it, of course, passed the House. But that at that time, they were trying to do some sports gambling legislation to legalize it here in Georgia in some capacity. And it did not pass either House by crossover day. So what did they do? They gutted the Lyon soapbox derby legislation, took all of the language out of it, and essentially copy and pasted all the sports betting legislation into a bill that had already passed. So that is just an example of what can happen and how we see these bills kind of progress beyond crossover day. And then also one other caveat.
Yeah.
Here in Georgia, not only do we have a part-time 40-day legislature, but we also have a biennial legislature, which means it is almost like a 2-year legislative process. So this is the second year. So bills that were proposed last year that maybe were left on the table or did cross one house but didn't pass in another, they just kind of froze in time and carried over to this second year of the biennial. So there was really not a lot of sweat last year with lawmakers on both crossover day and sine die, the final day, because they knew wherever their bills were at that time, they would just end up there when things started a couple of weeks ago. Not the case this time. This really is the last-ditch effort, because if lawmakers cannot get something done with their legislation by crossover day, presumably even by the end of the session, they will go away. They will have to start from complete scratch next year at the beginning of the biennial. So, varying levels to crossover day and how crazy it can be. This one, probably going to be a little bit nutty.
All right, so we'll be watching. Thanks for explaining all of that. It is kind of confusing. I want to talk, you mentioned that sports betting. That has been something that has been introduced many times over the last few legislative sessions. It has yet, obviously, to pass through. What are you most watching for when it comes to these bills that are being introduced? What has the best potential to actually make it through that would have the most impact on people here in the state of Georgia? And what bills really have no chance of making it through?
Yes, I can tell you about both. I've got my trusty list that I'm going to live and die by for the next couple of hours here. I would say we have to start with property taxes, right? So, if you had asked House Speaker John Burns at the beginning of the session what his top priority was, he would have told you literacy. His wife is a teacher. Literacy rates in Georgia are really tough. They already passed a bill dealing with literacy, and not to call out Speaker Burns, but I think maybe the priority of the majority of the House, at least on the GOP side, was property taxes. There is a proposal, it's House Bill 1114, that would essentially eliminate them. It would make them go away over the course of a number of years. By 2032, most people would not be paying property taxes. That was something that the Republicans had kind of put forward as an affordability measure to lighten people's burdens a little bit. There's a lot of sticker shock when it comes to property taxes. It makes it difficult for people to buy a home if they're kind of right on the line financially. And so this was a bill that would have essentially eliminated them. It required a constitutional amendment, which means they needed a supermajority in the House of Representatives. A constitutional amendment means this would go to the voters. They would vote on it on a ballot referendum. Republicans did not have the numbers to do it by themselves. Despite it being what I still argue is their biggest priority, this failed the House on a vote this week. And so they have very limited time and maybe even more limited options to go back to the table, rework this, maybe make it so that it is a simple majority and not a constitutional amendment. I can't tell you what they're going to do, but certainly that was a huge blow for Republicans, and we are going to see a massive coordinated scramble to try and get this property tax bill passed by crossover day. Will it? I couldn't tell you. I don't know what they're going to do, but it would be really embarrassing for the GOP if they were to come in, propose this bill, do study committees on it, make it their number one priority essentially, and then not have it even pass their own House. That would be tough. So watch out for that. A lot of data center bills this year. Data centers have kind of been the buzzword of the year, but it is a real thing here in Georgia. Certainly we need a place to store all of our data, but there are ecological, cost-effective issues to this, the amount of electricity and water it takes to run these data centers, the fact that they don't create a lot of jobs. People don't necessarily want them in their communities, and so we've seen moratorium bills that have not gotten votes in the House yet. We've seen bills that would prevent the cost of these electric, these really high electric needs being passed on to consumers. Those have not passed the House at all. What else we got, Rick? The ICE legislation. That was another big one, of course. That's top of mind for people as well.
Detention centers?
No, not necessarily. Although we have seen some legislation around detention centers that have had varying degrees of success. This one is actually by a representative out of Stone Mountain, the Democrat. Her name's Kim Jackson. She proposed a package of bills that would require ICE to have ID on them, to show ID when they're making an arrest, and they also could not wear face masks at this time. Very controversial between GOP support of ICE. Democrats decrying some of these Operation Metro Surge tactics in cities like Minneapolis and New Orleans. And so we are still waiting to see if that passes as well. You mentioned surprises and things that didn't get a lot of attention. We saw this offseason in special committees to investigate insurance, to investigate AI and how it impacts kids. We also saw a study committee on marijuana and expanding some of the list of things that could be included as ailments for people who would be able to go and get medical marijuana. We have not seen a single marijuana legislative bill drop at all this year. And so I think that if you want to talk about things that were missed, that is not something that legislators seem to have an appetite for this year. We haven't seen a single bill drop. There have been several that have been drafted. None of them are going to get votes before crossover day. And so I think that was an interesting thing. Usually when you have these study committees, you're kind of pegging an issue as a priority. We saw bills associated with a lot of the other study committees in the offseason, but we have not seen any marijuana bills that have to do with either criminal justice, expansion, really nothing along those lines.
It's interesting because, if you look at other states around the country, many have passed bills loosening restrictions on marijuana, some even decriminalizing marijuana, making its use, totally legal. That has obviously not happened here in Georgia. And even the laws that have been passed have been so restrictive that those in the medical marijuana community have complained that they still aren't getting the kind of legislative relief that they need in order to make marijuana available to patients who need it for medicinal reasons. Another thing that we look around the country, we are really one of only a handful of states, Doug, that has not legalized sports betting. We mentioned that a couple of minutes ago. What about that?
Yeah, dead on arrival this year, it seems like. I mean, this is now my fourth legislative session here working for the station. Every year but this year, there has been a real legitimate push to get sports betting done. As I said, they even went as far as to gut a bill on soapbox derbies to get it in there, and it still didn't work. I think the pros of this, right, are that you would be able to make a little bit of money in this case for education. They would, lawmakers under previous versions of the bill have put that money towards pre-K education, public school funding, things of that nature. And then, you have a really big lobby on the other side of this against sports betting, whether it be the Baptist Mission Board and a lot of other groups that have to do, with fighting the moral turpitude of what sports betting could bring to the state. And so, I think lawmakers may have just lost a lot of steam on it. Not to mention, both the GOP and the Democrats were pretty clear this year that their number one priority was going to be affordability. That's why we've seen measures to eliminate the income tax, eliminate property taxes. We've seen lots of measures that really touch people's pocketbooks. And I just don't think that lawmakers could reconcile a difference between saying, hey, we're focused on affordability, but we're going to spend all our time on sports betting. Probably not the most fiscally responsible thing for people to be doing. So I think that was just their thought process this year. We didn't see even a smidgen of a push for sports betting as we've seen in years past this legislative session.
Well, I'm excited for On the Record this weekend, Sunday morning. We're doing a special live broadcast on Sunday morning at 9:30 because of crossover day. By then, we will know which bills made it, which bills did not. And we're going to be able to talk about that with two sitting state lawmakers, which I think is really going to be interesting to hear what they have to say. Clint Dixon and Esther Panich, a Republican and a Democrat, will be joining us live on Sunday morning to talk about that. Again, On the Record Sunday morning at 9:30 a.m. So we hope you'll join us for that. And then, of course, we have that special election that's coming up real soon for MTG's seat, Georgia 14. This is the seat that is always up for grabs, it seems, since Marjorie Taylor Greene resigned.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. I mean, that'll be 2 days after our live episode. And so we're going to be spending a lot of time, hopefully out in Rome, talking to people there as they go to the polls to cast their votes. But this will be a very telling, I think, moment for that 14th district seat. We'll talk a little bit about it more on Sunday. But, given all that's been up in the air, there's really no front-running candidate. We will find out in just a couple days here.
All right, Doug, thanks so much. And thank you for watching our podcast here on The Record on ANF+. Again, a special live broadcast of On the Record this Sunday morning at 9:30 on Atlanta News First. We hope you'll join us then, and you can join us anytime for up-to-the-minute political news right here on Atlanta News First. I'm Rick Folbaum. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank you for watching ANF+. For more breaking news, live coverage, and your community stories, download the Atlanta News First app. You can also watch us on YouTube, Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. To join the conversation on YouTube Live, visit our channel and hit subscribe. You can also listen to the Atlanta News First podcast by searching Atlanta News First on your preferred listening platform.